Section 5 of Stories of Great Composers for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Franz Schubert, The Story of the Boy Who Wrote Beautiful Songs, by Thomas Tapper. One might say of Schubert that he was born with a spring of melody in his heart and a song on his lips. Can anyone make a melody more lovely than this? This melody is from Schubert's song, Trout. Play it, or have someone play it to you. Is it not worth remembering all one's life? Schubert composed many kinds of music, but his songs are most loved by everybody. They are sung all over the world. And just because he never let a song come from his lips that did not first come from his heart. Is not this a jolly one? From Schubert's song, Wandering. Schubert's full name was Franz Peter Schubert. He was born in Vienna, in a very simple house that looks quite old-fashioned. Over the doorway there is a bust of Schubert, a few inches high. And a sign on the house says, Franz Schubert's birthplace. Dates are easy to remember if we write them, so you must ask your teacher when Schubert was born and put in the date in the next sentence. Franz Schubert was born in... At that time, the great American authors Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, and William Cullen Bryant were all boys. You may not know so much about them now, but some day they will be quite as good friends as any you will ever make. Even though these boys were a little older than Franz Schubert, let us always think of them together. Then, of course, we should think of Schubert together with the composers who lived when he did. Here are some whose names you can remember very easily. Von Weber, Rossini, Czerny, Donizetti. Czerny was born in the year 1794 and wrote many studies for the piano. How much older was he than Franz Schubert? Von Weber wrote operas and conducted them himself. He was born 11 years before Schubert. Rossini was an Italian composer of operas, born in 1792, 5 years before Schubert. Schubert's life was so short, however, that Rossini lived 40 years longer than the great songwriter. Donizetti was an Italian opera composer. One of his well-known operas was Lucia di Lammermoor. He was born in 1797, just as Schubert was. Franz's father was a schoolmaster, and so was Franz himself, for 3 years. He taught the little children of Vienna their ABCs and how to do sums. Of course, he helped them to learn to read. Sometimes we find it quite hard to take one piano lesson or violin lesson a week. But from the time when Franz Schubert was a very little boy, he had lessons every week for violin, voice, and piano. A little later he began to study harmony with a very famous man who knew Mozart. His name was Antonio Salieri. With so many lessons, and with schoolwork just as we have it, Franz must have been a very busy boy. He was quite poor, and often very hungry, but in spite of that he was always good-natured and full of fun. At 11 years of age he became a singer at the chapel of the Emperor. It was here that Salieri was director. Franz sang in the choir until he was nearly 17. Then he became a schoolmaster, because, of course, he had to earn his living. Wherever he was, Franz was thinking music and composing it. Once he wrote a song called The Serenade, at a table outside an inn. An artist has made a picture of this. And here's a picture of Schubert sitting at a table composing his song. Once Schubert was seen by his boyhood friends busily writing a new song. So quick did he write that the ink was hardly dry on one sheet before the next one was done. He was writing the music to a beautiful fairy poem by the great German poet Goethe. The poem is called The Aryl King, and tells how the fairy Aryl King chases a father who is rushing on horseback with his dying child in his arms. Finally, just as the father reaches his courtyard, the child dies. It is a beautiful song sung by the greatest singers. Goethe, the great poet, is not known to have met Schubert. He paid little attention to his music. Here is his picture. And here's a picture of Johann Wolfgang Goethe. Sometime you will learn about Joseph Haydn, who died in Vienna when little Franz was 12 years old. Papa Haydn, as he was called, was music master in a famous family called the Esterházys. Let us put a picture of Joseph Haydn here, just to remember that he was an old man of 77, when little Franz was a boy of 12. Well, Franz Schubert also lived for a time with the Esterházy family. He was piano teacher to the children of Count Johann. Franz was then 21 years old. In what year was he 21? A good friend of Schubert's was Michael Vogl. He was a famous singer who did all he could to make Schubert's songs known. They took little vacation trips together and were good companions. When you read more about this singer's friendship for Franz Schubert, you will like him for being so kind to one who had very little pleasure in life. He looks like a good friend even in a picture. Do you not think so? Once, when Schubert and Vogl were enjoying a vacation tour in the mountains, Franz read Scott's Lady of the Lake, which was printed in the year 1810, when Schubert was 13 years old. Schubert set some of this poem to music, a fact you will remember when you read it in school. Perhaps you could remember at the same time that Scott was a little older than Schubert and just 1 year younger than Beethoven. Beethoven lived in Vienna at that time, and Schubert with 2 friends went to see him. Beethoven was very deaf, and those who met him had to write down what they wanted to say with a large pencil, such as is used by carpenters. Schubert was so modest and nervous upon meeting the great master that he could not even write his replies. Here is the picture of the way Beethoven looked as he walked down the street in those days. Once when Schubert was very ill, a friend sent him some books to read. They were The Last of the Mohicans, The Spy, The Pilot, and The Pioneer. Now these books were written by the American author, whose name you must find for yourself. See what a simple workroom Schubert had. Here are his clavier and chair and a few books. Schubert had music in his mind and soul all the time. It is said that one of his favorite walks was down by a mill, where he was inspired to write some beautiful songs. This is the way that Franz Schubert wrote his name. And here's a picture of Franz Schubert's signature. Facts about Franz Peter Schubert. When you have read this page and the next, make a story about Schubert's life. Write it in your own words. When you are quite sure you cannot improve it, copy it on pages 14, 15, and 16. 1. Schubert was born in Vienna. 2. His birthday was January 31st, 1797. 3. He died in Vienna in 1828. 4. When Schubert was born, Beethoven was 27 years old. 5. Schubert was a schoolmaster. 6. He had his first music lessons from his father, who was also a schoolmaster and who played the violin. 7. His brother taught him to play the piano, and he studied singing so as to join the emperor's choir. 8. Then he studied harmony with a famous man named Salieri. 9. When Franz was 13, he composed 2 piano pieces. At 14, he wrote 2 songs, and when he was 16, he wrote a symphony. 10. When he was 18, Franz wrote more than 100 songs. 11. He composed the Aryl King when he was 19. 12. In all, Schubert wrote over 600 songs, lots of piano pieces, 9 symphonies, and many other compositions. 13. What other composer also wrote 9 symphonies? Perhaps you may not know this. If not, ask your teacher. 14. Schubert made many good friends. 15. With them and his music he found all his happiness. 16. Once when he was very ill he read some books by an American author. Do you remember the author's name? 17. Do you remember the name of any one of the books? 18. One of Schubert's most beautiful symphonies was called The Unfinished because he did not live to complete it. 10 questions about Schubert. 1. Where was Schubert born? 2. When was Schubert born? 3. Name 2 American authors who were boys when Schubert was born. 4. Name 2 composers who lived at the same time. 5. What was the father of Franz Schubert? 6. Who taught Schubert harmony? 7. Give the name of a famous song by Schubert. 8. What famous musician died in Vienna when Schubert was 12 years old? 9. Who was the noted singer who helped to make Schubert's songs famous? 10. When did Schubert die? End of Franz Schubert, the story of the boy who wrote beautiful songs. Read by Kara Schallenberg, www.kray.org, on February 10th, 2011, in San Diego, California.